I pray that you pray as we go through this, that you allow the Holy Spirit to talk and work and show and share the direction for your life and even for this church's life. So we're going to be in Philippians chapter 2. We're going to dissect 1 through 8. And before we go into this passage, I want to share with you about a man. His name was Euphrates. He is not very known in the scriptures, but he is talked about twice in the book of Philippians. In particularly Philippians 2, 25 through about 30, 31. And why this is important, in particular as we go through Philippians, and particularly this passage, is because this man went to go deliver a care package to Paul. He talks more about this in Philippians probably about 10, 11, 12, talking about this care package and how you cared for me, and thank you a lot for sending him and the things that you're giving me as I'm in jail. Well, as he went and brought this to Paul, he got sick. And while he was sick, Paul began to take care of him. And they had, obviously, a great conversation, because he was supposed to just go and drop this food off as a token of love for Paul and then move on. Where he stayed, and they obviously had a interesting conversation, because after that conversation, after he was there for a little while, after it says he was actually to the point of death, but then he was made well again, and then Paul sent him back. He sent him back with a letter, and the letter is the book of Philippians. So if you really study the book of Philippians, there are some interesting things that you see in this book. Now, the Philippian church was a great church. It was a loving church. But there was some issues within the church. There was some fighting within the church. There was some false doctrines being preached within the church. And you can see that if you really, really zone in on a few things. And especially when it talks about unity, there was some issues and there's some conflict in there. As a matter of fact, in Philippians chapter 4, 2 and 3, he names two women by name who had served with him side by side, but they were arguing and causing division. And so you see some of these things throughout the book. You'll see like-minded. You see in Philippians chapter 1, he talks about conducting yourselves well for the gospel. He talks about being steadfast, striving together in one mind. And so you see some of these things, and it kind of leads up to chapter 2 where he hits this head on. And so it's important to know that during this conversation, probably this came up of what was going on, the good and the bad. And so that's why Paul hits this so hard. Talking about unity, talking about love, talking about selfishness and vain conceit. And so it's important to know as we move on the background in this. So Paul is addressing some issues, and this is one of them. And I think that it is highly important that we learn from the Philippian church and grow into a mature church. And if we can get this passage here, 1 through 8, I think God can entrust us with doing some great things for His name's sake. So with that, Philippians chapter 2, I'll start off with 1 and 2. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from His love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness or compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one spirit and one in mind. He's saying right here, because you are one church and you are united together under Christ, you are united, then you need to be like-minded. And he gives the definition of what it means to be like-minded, even in verse 2. It says, having the same love. The love that we should have for Jesus Christ. The love that we should have for others. The love that we should have for our church. We should have that consistent love for each other. And he says, being in one spirit, understanding what our purpose is, what our calling is, and doing it together. Not having fractions and not having divisions. He says, have the same love, be in one spirit and one mind. Since the believers in Philippi are united in Christ, this should have encouraged them to work towards a spirit of unity and in love, not one in division or rivalry. Where you say, well, Joe, why are you saying division or rivalry? Because in verse 1 and 2, he's saying, well, if there's any encouragement of being in me, one church, and then being united, and then he says being in one mind, he's saying do this in love and in one spirit and one mind. Where do you see the division and rivalry from? In verse 3, in verse 4, in verse 5. Because right after he says you need to be united, you need to have one mind, you need to be one in spirit, you have to love each other. Then he says this, do nothing, in verse 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Do nothing. That's a statement. That's something that he wanted to hit home. Paul saying to the church, your disagreement reveals there's a spiritual problem in your fellowship. There's a spiritual problem. He said, I want you to be unified. I know what a great church can do if it's unified, if they're loving each other with full love, if they're moving in one direction with one calling, with one mind, and there's no stop of movement. It's just purely following the calling and the order and the direction of the Holy Spirit. You can do some great things. You need to do some great things in that city that you're in. But you can't do it if there's fractures. And he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Problems like this can only be solved when our hearts are right with Christ and with each other. There was a major problem going on here. And he's addressing it by asking them to be unified and not to be selfish or with vain conceit. Paul is saying, after these 4 words, there cannot be any motivating factor. No motivating factor at all after these 4 words. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit. There can be no motivating factors in your life at all as a Christian. Not just within the church, not within the church body. Because sometimes we'll say, well, I'm not like that within the church. But how are you at home? How are you at work? How are you just in life in general? This life teaches these things. And that's why it's so important that we really take a step back and look at our lives. Am I this? Because Paul was so emphatic by saying, do nothing out of self-ambition. Is that who you are? Because that's what the world teaches. That's how you become successful. That's how you move forward in life. And if I have to stab somebody in the back, I'm going to do it. If I have to lie about something, then I'm going to do it. If I have to be sneaky, or if I have to do that, then I'm going to do it. And these things happen even within the church. Church leadership. Do you know that there's politics within the church? Some of you are like, no, there's no politics within the church. Yes, there's politics within the church. And if we're not careful, our own desires for what the church does and where the church goes outside of the direction of Jesus Christ will come in conflict with what Jesus wants for this church. And that's why it's so important that all of us may have a steady diet of prayer in our lives so that we can have direction, not just for the church, but for your own life, that we may not be self-absorbed. So, let's take a look at what it really means to be self-ambition or vain conceit. Let's take a look at why he was so emphatic. And as a matter of fact, I think it's important to know, as soon as he talks about being unified, being one mind and one spirit and one love and one direction, he immediately goes right into that. And don't be. and don't be. To me, that says, if you're this, you will cause problems within your church, within your family, within your community, within your workplace. They correlate together. So, the first forbidden motivation is self-ambition. Definition: strife and rivalry. Wanting to be thought of as superior, a pride that prompts people to push for their own way. Let me read that one more time. And I want you to think about, you're probably doing it anyways. You know anybody like that? Strife and rivalry. I want to be that guy. I want to have the answers. I want to be the guy that's always solving the problems. Strife and rivalry, wanting to be thought of as superior. They want to do that so people look at them as, wow, you're awesome. Man, you just know your stuff. Man, you know somebody like that? Wanting to be thought of as superior, a pride that prompts people to push for their own way. Yes, there are politics that go on in the church. Yes, that we have to have major meetings and we have to come up with we have to make major decisions. But we never want to be prompted or motivated so we can just have our own way, because that's just who we are and that's what we want and that's what makes us feel good. We have to make sure that when we're talking about, do you know somebody like that? We need to make sure that's not you. We need to make sure that that's not me, because that's one of the things that the enemy always uses, and he uses from the beginning of time. It's all about me. It's all about my decisions. I want to prop myself up so I can feel good about my life. That's why this happens over and over and over again, because we want to feel good about our lives. Because we live in a tough world, because we call ourselves Christians, and we have an enemy that doesn't like that, he's coming after us. And he knows that, look, there's a church here that's wanting to make a difference in the community. There are Christ followers, and I have to make sure that that doesn't happen. And what he's been using for a long time is selfishness. If I can get them thinking about just their own life, their own way, then I can move them away and cause divisions and cause fights, and I'll whisper in this ear and I'll whisper in that ear. And this one thinks he's right, and this one thinks he's right, because there's a deficiency in their own life. They want that feeling in their life to feel like, okay, I've got all the answers. I'm the guy that has all the right answers. I can make all the decisions. Look at me, that's right. But I'm going to pretend like I'm humble, but down deep, I like it, and I want it, and I need it. Paul's saying, stay away from that. Stay away from that. Number 2, conceit. If self-ambition is the desire to be better than everyone else, then conceit is the sore loser when you don't feel like you measure up or you don't get your way. How many of y'all know that person? They say, well, I know the best way. Here's how we need to do it. And we move away from that and we move to a different idea or a different thought. And because that thought wasn't taken, you kind of feel like, well, guess what? I'm going to make sure that never works out. Or, because we decided to do that, I'm not going to provide any effort. I'm not going to serve in that area. I'm just going to kind of move away. As a matter of fact, I'm probably going to cause some strife because they decided to do their own thing, their own idea. And because it wasn't mine, I'm going to make sure that it never happens. I'm going to spread some gossip. I'm going to spread some lies. I'm going to make sure that never takes off. There are many things within the church today that are good ideas or some good thoughts, and it never takes off and maximizes its effort because people get their feelings hurt and they say, well, guess what? I'm going to make sure that never happens. Conceit will slander and lie in order to save face. Now again, this goes on not only in the church, it goes on in the home, between husbands and wives. Yeah, it does. It goes on in the workplace. It goes on throughout this world, because that's, if you really take a step back, that's what this world is predicated on. It's all about me, what I can attain, how people look at me, because I want people to look at me a particular way so I can feel good about myself. And that is so contrary, as we will learn, to who Jesus was. You'll do whatever it takes to look good in front of others. Is that you? It's me sometimes. Let's be honest. It's me sometimes. I have to battle that. And I know you have to battle that. Because we all want that feeling we all want that, Paul wants them to know the basic cause for their problem was this: selfishness. And the cause of selfishness is pride, which from the very beginning was the original sin. Do you know that was the original sin? Pride. Goes back to Lucifer. Remember Lucifer? I want to be God. I want to have my own kingdom. I want to overthrow God. How about this one? Back even to to earth. Adam and Eve. Pride. I want to have all knowledge. I want to listen to that serpent. I want to be all powerful. I want to be my own God. I want to rule the world. Pride, selfishness has been causing chaos through the ages. Through the ages. And has been causing chaos even within the church today. Even within the family today. Selfishness. Conceit. This selfish conviction is an underlying sin beneath every other sin. It's pride. Are you a proud person and you just have that pride and you'll do whatever it takes to get your way in your marriage, to get your way in your family, in your church? This causes destruction when we're talking about unity within the church. It causes destruction in your family. And by the way, if you're battling this a little bit and you're not married, begin to pray to remove that before you get married. Because I've seen over and over and over again young marriages struggle because they too come into a marriage and they want their own way. I want what I want, and it's all about me. And when you go into a marriage and it's all about you, and then for your wife it's all about her, there's never any unity. There's never any harmony. So before you get married, if you're not married, work on that. And if you're married and that's causing problems, you need to work on that. To be more selfless than selfish. Work on unity. Work on not your own way all the time. And we'll talk about that here in a second. The wrench in the gears of Christianity and Christian unity is individual self-ambition and vain conceit. This has to be removed from any church that's going to work in full power and access to do great things in this community. It has to be removed. Not just our church, but every church. And by the way, it has to be a continual thing, because the enemy will say, look, I may have lost today, but I'll be back tomorrow. I may have lost in this moment, Bob, but I'll come back in another moment. This has to be something in your mind at all times. That's why he said, do nothing, never do anything out of these two things. Ever. Every day, in every area, in every moment of your life. And that's why Paul states emphatically, verse 3 and then in verse 4, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. But here we go. Here's where it gets interesting. Here's where everything changes. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Not looking to your own interests, but also the interests of others. This is a game changer. This changes everything. Remember when I said this is at the pinnacle of maturity? It's right here. Because you may say, well, look, I don't really have that bad of a problem with vain conceit or self-ambition. I really don't look at myself. I have my moments like we all do, but that's not a main issue. Well, guess what? Paul said, he just didn't say, don't do things out of selfish ambition. He said, rather. There's a flip side to that. It's not just don't do this. He said, do this. Be this. So let me ask you, are you doing this? Are you being this? Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking out for your own interests, but each of you for the interests of others. You may say, well, I'm not selfish, but are you selfless? Are you selfless? Paul's saying this, make decisions. Are you ready for this? This is heavy now. This is going to get deep. We're in heavy waters now. Paul's saying, make decisions as if everyone you encounter is more important than you. I'll read that one more time. This is what he's saying. Make decisions in your life, as if everyone you encounter is more important than you. Now we're really colliding with the world. Now we're really colliding with the world viewpoint of life. Because if I read that on ABC News and say, look, this is who people should be, this is what we should do, man, the uproar. Because it would say, no, you're wrong. It's not about others. It's about you. It's about me. It's about attaining. Not for Jesus. We are naturally interested in the things that interest us. Okay? This is how we move there. We're naturally interested in the things that interest us. If I like sports, I'm interested in those things, and I moved in that direction. And I watch sports, and I read different magazines. If I'm interested in the Scriptures, I'm reading the Scriptures. I'm praying. I'm interested in a relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm moving in that direction. We are naturally interested in things that interest us. Take what is natural and learn to put it into practice intentionally for others. You're naturally interested in yourself, in your desires, in your pleasures. He's saying, flip the script. And instead of looking at yourself and how you can get and pleasure yourself and get everything that you want, turn it around and do it for others. Now we're talking about maturity. Now we're talking about maturity. We must turn our eyes away from ourselves and only focus on the needs of others. That's not easy. It's not easy to do. This is difficult. As I teach this, I'm also being convicted myself, and I've been working on this for a week or longer. Because it's not easy, because we're so taught and trained. And I have my desires, and you have your desires. But if God says, look, let that go, let that $1,000 go, let that TV go, let that couch go, let that idea of you winning an argument, even if you're right in an argument, let it go. Husbands, even if we're right in an argument, for the sake of harmony and unity, let it go. In our church, there may be some issues and conflicts, and we may be right, and we may understand the bigger picture. But if it's going to cause disunity, if it's going to cause strife or division, and it's not something major at this time, let it go. Remember how we talked about sometimes we just have to absorb some of the things that comes our way? We talked about sometimes we don't have the right to be offended. As Christians, we give that right up to be offended. And sometimes we just have to absorb the blows so that we won't continue division. That's what he's talking about here. It's not just stuff. It's actions. It's behaviors. It's responses. It's saying no. As Christians, you don't have the right to be offended. If we can all in this church get to a point where we say no to being offended, we say no to opening up our hearts and our life to an offense, because we understand that it just causes conflict. If we say, yes, I'm going to be offended, then we get angry, we get mad, we get bitter. We continue conflict within a family or a church or a friendship. And next thing you know, if we take that in, then we bring others into it and we move away from being unified. That's what he's saying here. In the big picture, all these things matter. For somebody that is mature, we have to learn to do this. Now, many of y'all have already started. I started this before I really began to understand and unpack the Scripture, which was years and years ago. We learn this when we get married. When we get married, we are taught that my life, everything about me is now hers, and vice versa. And I remember learning that a long time ago when, after 2 years of marriage, we were that super couple. We were that high school sweethearts. I was 15, she was 16. We never fought one time while we were dating. For 3 years, we never fought. And the church was like, oh, Pam was the pastor's daughter. I was the new Christian that was moving away from being a rebel to being loving and being active in the church. And we got married, and everything was great for the first year. And after the second year, we found ourselves at the Silver Diner deciding if we're going to stay married or not, with a newborn. That's how bad it got. Why? Because I wanted my way and she wanted hers. Praying through that, for me, God spoke to me even with this passage and said, look, what are you doing, Joe? What are you doing? You're not leading. There's no harmony. There's no unity. And you're the problem. You may say, well, she's causing conflict. You're the leader. And he began to teach me what it meant to be selfless. And I decided right then and there, I want to be the best husband I can be, the best father I can be, the best Christian I can be. And if I was going to do that, I needed to be selfish. And I began to learn that and to apply that all the way to a pinnacle in our, for me anyways. Pam was sick one night, and she was, just miserable, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. She couldn't breathe. She was coughing, just one of those bad flus, and I can tell. And all of a sudden, the Lord spoke to me 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, Joe, I want you to get up. I want you to go find a store, and I want you to go buy her some medicine. And of course, I responded back to God and said, I would like to do that. I will do that when I get up about 7 o'clock. But it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm in bed. I'm trying to sleep. I got to get up and go to work. Do I really? And then he said something like this verse. And then he said something like, well, you're supposed to love your wife the way Christ loved the church. Christ went and died for the church. Will you at least get up and go get your wife some medicine? After a conversation like that, what do you think I did? All right, I'll get it. I got up and I went and drove around and drove around and drove around. Finally found some medicine, and on my way back, you know where it says, when you serve others, and when you are a blessing to others, you're blessed? I felt that blessing because all of a sudden I felt good that I was doing something selfless for my wife. And when I got in and I kind of woke her up and said, hey, look, I got some medicine for you, I saw that look that every man and every husband wants to see. It's a look of thankfulness, of my husband is looking out for me. My husband got up in the middle of the night and thought about me. And that was a game changer for me because I started seeing that, and then I read this, that I was supposed to have that same selfless love to give up a few hours of sleep, to give up these things. I'm supposed to have that same love for everybody, not just my wife. So some of y'all may say, well, I've got that love for my wife. Paul's saying this, you need to have that love, that selfless love for everybody that you come in contact with. And what we fail to realize is when we have that love for everybody that we have in contact with, and we are a blessing to others, we are constantly being blessed because there is no greater blessing, there is no greater feeling in the world but to help those in need, to be a blessing, not look at yourself. You can absorb it, you can endure it, whatever it may be. Your interest is the interest of others. And that's a great attribute and feeling to have. Now, let's move on, because he changes now from that statement, do not, but rather do, and he says, do it like this person did. He gives us an illustration. Verse 5 and 6. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset, going back to verse 2 and 3, the same mindset as Christ Jesus did. Here's the example. Who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his advantage. Jesus was always the most important person in the room, but he never leveraged that for his sake. In his ministry, he never leveraged the fact that I am God and you need to bow before. He came as a simple servant, serving others, period. I'm going to read to you verse 6 again, and I'm going to go right into verse 7. I don't have it in my slides, but I want to go from 6 to 7. Who being in the very nature God, because I want you to get, this is powerful. This is powerful. And I'm going to read it nice and slow so we all can really get it and soak it. Who being in the very nature God, Jesus was, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his advantage. Rather, here it is again, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. I'm coming for a reason. I'm coming to save my people. And yes, I'm God in flesh. But I'm not coming to be served. I'm coming to serve. Mark 10:45 says this, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life ransom for many. So here we go. Jesus came to endure pain, the punishment of sin, of all man's sin, of your sin and my sin. And he took all the abuse, and he walked in this world. He walked from place to place, healing, loving with unconditional love, all for one reason, for you and I. Knowing that his destination would be the cross. Knowing that the people that were supposed to be holy men, the Pharisees, couldn't stand him. The Sadducees wanted to kill him. But yet he continued to move on and move forward and take everything man had. If anybody didn't deserve that, it was him. And that's what that verse says. He didn't use it to his advantage because that wasn't his purpose. His purpose was you and I. His purpose was others. And he was willing to absorb and endure it all for others. And Paul's saying, your picture is Jesus. He did it for you. You wear his name, and I want you to do it for others. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. That's why we wear his name. And we have to be mature enough and godly enough and prayed up enough to understand our calling. He's saying the calling is not for this life. It's for the next. And if you want to find that joy, if you want to find that peace, then this is how you find it, by doing this. And that is so contrary to the world and the world's teaching. And we're battling these things. We're battling our pleasures. But you need to know, happiness does not come from happenings. It comes from serving God. It comes from taking his principles and taking this principles and make it yours and living it out loud, because there's people around your circle of influence that need you. Because you have the answers to life, and it's in one word, Jesus. Amen. And they need to see that in you. That's why we wear his name. We want people to know, yes, I am a Christian. I am Christ-like. I am taking on the identity of Christ, and I'm living him. I don't take on the name and live just like the world does. So when we're talking about this is huge. This is important. And it's not easy. And you're not going to take this and just make it yours every single day. This is something that you're going to have to battle with and struggle with, because the enemy of this is pride. And as we talked about before, that was the foundational sin from the very beginning. And it's been used on over and over and over and over again. And it will happen in your life, your family's life, and the church's life. But we must yield and stand firm. Can we do that? Let me tell you this. You can only do that if you decide to do that. With His power and your effort, His strength. But you have to have a made-up mind. That's what Paul said. That's when he was saying one accord. Because you can't do this by yourself. But if we all decide that this is who we want to be as a church, we want to be unified. We want to live like we give our lives away on behalf of the King. We can do it together. And that's what the Lord is calling us to do, is to be a church that's unified together. Not self-absorbed, not selfish, but selfless. And what happens is, if you become selfless, then you become a servant. And there's a difference between someone who serves and a servant. Someone who serves picks and chooses what they want to do. They decide if they want to be self-absorbed or not. They decide if they want to do this, or if that responsibility is beneath them. Or I don't have time because I have more important things to do. That's somebody who serves. A servant says, look, I'm here to serve no matter what. If you want me to clean the toilets, that's what I'm going to do. If you need me to come early at 8 o'clock to fix coffee, that's what I'm going to do. If you need me to come early to vacuum the sanctuary so that we'll have a clean floor, that's what we'll do. If you need me to go and do some outreach, if you want me to go do some prayer walks in our community so it can be prepared for us to reach them, that's what I'm going to do. That's a servant. You can't be a servant